Hey y'all, it's AJ here from Sports Chaplaincy South Africa. We don't normally get starstruck on this podcast, but we came quite close this time. In this episode, on the eve of the Women's Soccer World Cup, we host Desiree Ellis, coach of our women's national team, Banyana Banyana. A former captain of Banyana, as a coach, she led them to their first ever Women's World Cup appearance in 2019 and their maiden Women's Africa Cup of Nations title in 2022, and won the COSAFA Cup 3 times. She was Africa's Women's Coach of the Year in 2018 and awarded the National Order of Ikhamanga by the South African government. In what is part 1 of a 2-part series with Des, Bruce talks to her about her formative years in football leading up to playing for the national team and the struggles of having to persevere through humbling circumstances before reaching a dream of playing for Banyana. It really is a tale of guts before glory, and she pulls no punches with the deeds. If you're enjoying our work, give us a like and a share on your socials, and find us on all the top podcast apps like Podbean, Google Podcasts and Apple, and search for the Call Up Podcast, where faith meets sport and life.
The Call Up Podcast, where faith meets sport and life. This is brought to you by Sports Chaplaincy South Africa.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted today to have with me somebody who can only be described as a pioneer and a groundbreaker in South African sport. She's a pioneer and a groundbreaker as a player, a pioneer and a groundbreaker as a coach. She's paved the way for a generation of female athletes in this country, I believe, in multiple sports. And she won't accept this title. But given all the difficulties and challenges South Africa are facing right now, and what is a dark time in the country's history, I'm going to be bold enough to say that this woman is a national hero. She provides inspiration and hope in a very, very difficult time. And I know that's going to come out as we journey with her today and allow her to share her story. So, Banyana Banyana coach, Desiree Ellis, off to the World Cup very, very soon. Welcome to the Call Up Podcast.
Bruce, I'm just blessed to be here, and thank you for having me today.
Well, it is a delight, and not only that, we're not really here to promote your book, but we're going to anyway. You've just brought a book out. It's called Magic. Desiree Ellis, from Salt River to the 2023 World Cup, and your story is so full of inspiration and hope. We're actually going to do this in 2 parts, and I want us to go right back to the 1960s and the 1970s, growing up in Salt River. Just paint the picture for us of life growing up in that community in that time.
Look, I actually didn't live in Salt River. Back in the day, we lived in Heideveld, and we used to trek every day because we went to school in Salt River, so Monday to Friday. My parents would take us in the morning, drop us off at my grandmother's place, and then go off to work. And we would spend Monday to Friday during my primary school years, my high school years. That was the trek. Eventually, we moved to Hanover Park, and from there, the same trek to Salt River every single day. My mother would pack in food for us, because we were quite a few kids. Later on, we became 5 kids, and my mother would pack in food, and in the afternoon when we got home, the food was there for us to eat, and my grandmother would take care of us, not just us, but my cousins as well. And my cousins were mostly boys. And in the afternoon when we got home from school, the boys were already waiting outside to play.
So that's the question I wanted to ask you. How does a working class girl of colour in the apartheid era end up ditching the bally shoes, right, to break the gender stereotypes at the time and discover this passion for football? Yeah,
you're right. I did ballet. I was actually at the Ian group. I was on blocks, by the way, and not many people know that. We had a teacher at the primary school, and he taught us ballet, and when he left, we stopped, obviously, because there's no one to take it further. But I always loved the game of football from a very young age, and I used to get into trouble quite often because the school that I went to had a girls' playground and a boys' playground, and I used to jump over the fence and play with the boys and get into trouble because the girls didn't play football. But because I played netball for the school, I regularly got out of detention, but I couldn't wait for the afternoon because I knew there was another game happening. Back in Grief Street and Westminster Road in Salt River, boys were waiting for me to play. And normally you have to do your homework, but I would always say, I can do it tonight. But this game is not going to wait for me.
Yeah, and so you're playing on the streets, you're jumping over you're breaking the gender barriers by jumping over the fence at school as well. How were your parents about this,
My parents were quite okay. The only problem was that I regularly needed school shoes. So my father would, while he's driving around, he was a typewriter technician at the time. And while he was driving around, he would pop in and he would literally take my shoes off my feet. And I would play bare feet. He would take it off because he would inspect the shoes. Because, my parents were working class. We were not well off. Yeah. But we were taken care of, and one month I would get a pair of shoes, the next month my sister, the next month the other sister, and so on and so on.
But those shoes are supposed to last the school year, right? And if you're playing football on the street in them, they're not going to last.
Definitely not. But I just carried on playing, and then I actually got a pair of soccer boots from someone which was miles too big, but that ended up being my shoes on the street.
Excellent. Yeah, I can picture the scene now, and of course the days of playing on the street, we're seeing that a lot less now, aren't we? I think you and I grew up in an era where it's a lot more common for children to play out on the streets. So yeah, you started out with street football, but that's not where the story ends.
No, not at all. I think nowadays it's a lot less safer. Yeah. Parents have to take care of the kids. Also, there's so many other things that they can do, doing PlayStation and all of that stuff, and having other interests, of course. But didn't stop there. We used to challenge each other, the different streets, and we used to go to pep stores and buy these T-shirts and write on there whatever we needed to write on there. And didn't only play football, we played the other games that boys played as well, cricket, rugby. That was a bit rough for me, but, cricket, etc. But I always loved the game of football. When God puts something in you, you've got to use that talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And God puts, it wasn't by accident that you ended up ditching the ballet shoes for the streets to play football, because God had wired you that way.
Yeah, not at all. I think each of us have a special talent that God has given us, and we need to find what that special talent is. Because God gives us that for a reason. We're not just here to be, but we're here to change lives. And through what we do, we change lives.
Absolutely.
And sport is football or a team sport is a type of sport where you touch many people, where you interact with many people, and as individuals, we touch each other's lives by the stories we tell.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that you're someone who's used your platform and used your talent not just to build your own life, but actually to share something of the goodness of God and the hope of Jesus with others, simply by the journey you've gone on. But you don't remain on the streets playing. You eventually get involved with organised football at LFA level. Tell us a little bit about the formation of it's Athlone Celtic, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
I think you're about 15 at the time, and the opportunities to play football for girls and women of colour at that time are incredibly limited. So tell us a little bit about that story and some of the challenges you faced.
Back in the day, you're playing with the boys and you dream of playing for the girls team, but we don't know of any around. And I'm playing, and these two gentlemen approached me to want to come and play for the girls team. And I'm quite, girls? I don't know there's girls playing football, That was my reaction back then. And I joined the team. They had formed already the beginning of the year. Found out a little about the history afterwards that, they decided, like they say, go the other side because they thought there were more opportunities, and I joined the team. And when I joined the team, I regularly, and my father was with, and I regularly had to pull down my shorts because people didn't believe I was a girl. They said girls don't play football like that.
Yeah.
In actual fact, when I was scouted, the two guys that came, they thought I was a boy. They actually said, that tiny boy, because of tiny, flat-chested, short hair. I generally looked like a boy, and that's what people assumed because I was playing, and they said, that boy is quite good, but he's very tiny, you know. And then someone said, but it's not a boy, it's a girl. And they went, wow, we need to get, hold of this girl. And I joined the team, and I was regularly told that, I wanted to be a boy. But all I wanted to do was to do something that I love. And I think because I had the support of my parents, I think that was important for me, that I had that support and that mentorship and that motivation behind me. And my father was my biggest critic, but he was also my biggest support. And I think that helped me.
I think it is. And I think when there's so many social conventions at the time that stereotype and say, this is for boys, this is for girls, it can be very, very challenging to pursue that passion. So the support of parents is obviously very, very important. But you begin to progress in the game. I think you end up playing provincial level as well. But your book's actually entitled Magic. So I've got to ask you, how on earth did you get that nickname?
When I first made the provincial team, I was 15 years old, and I remember coming from school and checking my bag 100 times to make sure that I had everything in my bag. And when my dad came from work, we off to Old Mutual because that's where the tournament was. And halfway, I checked my bag again, and my boots are not in my bag. And my dad's very angry, and he turns around and he said, "We don't play today, but I get there in time for the warm up, and I play." And during that tournament, we play against a team called Southern Transvaal back in the day. This was around 1978. And we play against a team called Southern Transvaal. And I remember afterwards, the one player that I remember, Michelle Warner, she started calling me Magic. She said whenever I touched the ball, they couldn't touch me. She actually used the word, I humiliated the whole team. But I was just enjoying something that, I love doing and getting the opportunity now to really play. My father got a lot of job offers, obviously because of that, but we stayed in Cape Town, and I just continued with my journey, along the way. And then every provincial tournament, people started calling me by this nickname, Magic. And when I was talking to my manager before we did the book, and we were talking about that, and he said, sounds like a name for a book, And at first I was very reluctant because many had asked me to write a book, but I believe each and every one of us have a story to tell. And I think the story that we tell inspires others by who we are and what we do. And mine is exactly that. It's just a story of hope.
We're already picking up on the fact that you've broken some gender barriers here. You've broken some racial barriers here. And a very difficult time in South Africa's history. But it's also true, we've not touched upon this yet, but there are actually financial barriers. The game's amateur. You have to raise the funds yourself. You've got to go to work. You're playing at the highest level of women's football, but you still got to work. Tell us about some of your work experiences in that time, maybe the good and the bad.
I actually worked at OK Bazaars, in the cash office. The cashiers come in and they bring their bags that's obviously, got a lock on, and we have to check the money, and then the money goes away, etc. So I worked in the cash office, but in that time I also played football. And sometimes I would miss a game because I worked in retail. A game would be on a Saturday and I'd be off on a Sunday, and I couldn't always change, swap with someone. I would then miss a game and the team would play without me. Back in the day, that's how it is. And I think for some it's still like that nowadays, where you have to work 8 to 5 and then go to training. And it just shows that we have the love of the game at heart, and we just want to go out there and play. And that carried on for a very long time, and sometimes even on a Friday night I would work till 9 o'clock because the store was open till 9, and my dad would be waiting outside with a car to take us home. He made sure always that he picked us up, and even while I was playing, he would go and he would pick us up and stay for the duration of the game, and so on. And my sisters eventually also was forced to play because the club was about to fold, and my mom and dad took the club over, and the club was about to fold, and all of them were forced to play. And when it came for interprovincial tournaments, there were many players they didn't have, so my mother would start sewing and making these leather purses and leather jackets, and selling them so that the players in the team could also travel and go with the team. And then because that we've helped everyone, my father would then get a couple of guys together and jump in his car and then drive down and come and watch us play.
So what I'm hearing is those barriers are broken for a lot of reasons. One is just the driving, as you've already identified, God-given passion and talent. You are not going to stop me from playing football because I was made to do this. I was created to do this. But also the support of family and community. I think that's clearly really significant in your story, and more evidence that our achievements are not just based on ourselves. We need others. We need community around us to support that. But I know that towards the end of the 1980s, things are difficult in South Africa. We've got the state of emergency. I think Ashley Creel had just died in Bonteville, and you're not living far away from there. School is disrupted, but so is football. Getting around is difficult. Just tell us a little bit about that period and some of the challenges you faced in terms of just being able to play.
It was very scary for all of us. We knew the situation in the country, and leaders out there that stood up, that created opportunities for us later. They were not treated well, and it was heartbreaking and scary. And my parents really tried to take care of us during that time, and sometimes we would play matches and sometimes we would not because of the situation. Because you always want to play. You're always looking for a way to play, but I think it was the most scariest moments that I've ever faced. We didn't know what was going to happen in the country, but God always prevails. God always prevails and makes a way. And we sympathize with the families, obviously, because from where we come and the way we grew up, that was not the norm. But we were not living in a normal society at the time, and thankfully and gratefully things have changed to give us all an opportunity, not just as sports people, but as people, entertainers, everybody else. You're not allowed to go where you want to go. You're allowed to do what you want to do, So I remember traveling to Natal, and we were early for a tournament, and we went to this caravan park, and we wanted to check in, and obviously we had white people of color, etc., all in the group, and the manager went and she booked, and when we drove in and they saw it was a mixed group, they all of a sudden said that we couldn't stay there. So we had a lot of difficult times, but because we loved the game so much, we persevered. I always say God gives us a talent. We must use it as much as we can until we can't use it anymore.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Difficult times, but maybe worth remembering that in the light of where we are maybe now as a country, as difficult and as painful as some things might be right now, we're not where we were then. And the fact that we've got a multiracial female team going to a FIFA World Cup is testament to the opportunities your generation and the generation before you have enabled. And we recognise that there were a lot of sacrifices that came with that. But with the transition to democracy and the end of apartheid, doors open. South Africa is reincorporated into the global sports family. And that means finally, in your 30s, I think, you get the opportunity to at last represent your country. Just give us some idea of, the feelings, emotions that came with that at the time, and maybe some of your memories from that time.
So I was working at a meat market in Lansdowne, in the storeroom, mixing all the spices for the polonies and whatever else they make. And then our former late president, Nelson Mandela, gets released, and we all get the opportunity now to go try for the national team. And I go to the supervisor and I say, listen, I've got this opportunity, and I mean, this is something that I've been dreaming of for a very long time. Obviously, not knowing that it was going to happen or when it was going to happen. And this very young age of 30, I go and we said, you decide what you want to do. And I think, okay, if I go and I come back, I'll be in time for work for Monday, etc., etc. And I go to the front desk, front of the butcher. What do you need? And I make sure that there's enough. And I go. And back in the day, we traveled in a minibus. So we get to Johannesburg. Terry Payne's the first coach, and I've never run so much, by the way.
And Terry Payne's a World Cup winner, 1966 with England.
Yeah. He's the first coach, and you start training, and fantastic team. I make the team as the vice captain, and I score a hat-trick on debut, and we win 14-0. We play against Eswatini, by the way. A couple of days ago was the 30th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Because our first game was the 30th of May 1993 against Swaziland. And on the way back, we get a puncture, and I get to work a day late. And as I get to work, I get fired because in their eyes, I absconded. And the late Kedi Choma was involved in women's football, flies to Cape Town, come see the bosses. They want to know nothing. So now I'm out of work for 3 years.
Wow.
But I won't say I didn't care. I was living my dream, and odd jobs here and there. I know when you're selling those door-to-door sales, I was one of them. Working.
So tell us about Noordhoek, selling toys in Noordhoek door to door.
In Noordhoek, and the houses are so far apart. So by the time you're done for the day, you've walked so many miles or so many kilometers. And I regularly had to make sure that I had enough money on me, because if I didn't sell anything, there's no way of me getting home. So that happened, and then I worked at a shop, a bakery sort of food shop, where you sell food. You weigh the food and you put it in a little container and you sell it. I worked at that place as well, in the time. And then, Mark Leeson came to me and he said to me, he's the editor of Kickoff. He gets all these fan mails. For example, where does Benny McCarthy play? You have the address? And he said he didn't want to get someone like Caligal, but he knew that I would know where to get hold of that. And then, I would type all these letters and leave it somewhere for him to sign. And he actually said to me, you don't have to work whole day. And I'm like, I've been out of work for 3 years, So I got 5 rand a letter, by the way. And at 5 o'clock when the company closed, I went to subscription, because I then packed the gifts for the subscription department, because that was extra cash. And then I would run to Cape Town Station, try to catch the last taxi, because the last taxi would leave at 7 o'clock. Catch the last taxi, and then the taxi goes as far as Hanover Park Terminus, and then the bus is gone. Then I used to run down, and when I get home, my mom would ask, who dropped you? Because it's quite dangerous, for a girl running down that time of the evening. And all I would say, the bus just went past now.
Yeah. I can't get over this. Just what's driving you in all of this is just this desire to play, isn't it? You're doing these jobs, sometimes jobs you don't want to do. I mean, the kickoff job sounds like a really good one, but you're doing stuff you're not passionate about in order to finance what you're really passionate about. And I think anybody listening to this, especially if you're now a professional sports person, and you're paid to do what you do, need to hear that actually your passion for the sport and your recognition that God had given you this talent, was the thing that consistently drove you. I know that you win the inaugural COSAFA Cup as a player, but you also end up losing very painfully the first women's AFCON final. Is that right? Is that 2000, around that time?
Actually, the first sort of AFCON was on a home and away basis, 1995.
Yeah.
Where we play Nigeria in the last round, and we really thought we had a chance, and they hammered us. 4-1 away and 7-1 at home.
Ouch.
But they had a very good team.
Yeah.
They really had a very good team, and we thought we were that good. but they had a good side, even though our side was good as well. And then 1998 was the first tournament.
Okay.
That was held in Nigeria. And unfortunately, one of the opponents in our group withdrew, so we only had 3. And it became so difficult. We lost to Cameroon, we lost to Ghana, and obviously we were out of the tournament. And the first one in South Africa was in 2000. That was the first one, and we got to the final, and then we had a crowd disturbance after they scored their second goal with the player lying in offside position, and our fans didn't throw stones, they threw bricks.
Oh no.
And we tried to calm them down, and eventually the game was awarded to Nigeria.
And they were winning at the time.
And they were winning at the time 2-0, yeah.
Yeah. And we'll maybe come back to that, because Nigeria are the nemesis, aren't they? They've always had a strong women's game, haven't they? But it's going to be a long time in your story.
Yeah.
And we'll come to that in part 2 when we track your coaching story. And maybe that'll help people understand just how incredible it was when you finally lifted that AFCON trophy in 2022. But we're going to leave that for part 2. So your career inevitably comes to an end, as it does for everyone. Age catches up with all of us. So as you look back over your life and over your playing career, where do you see God's hand at work?
I think throughout my career, because girls, it's the norm not for girls to play football. But God opens that door for me to play football. And I think throughout that, His hand is all over because of the opportunities that come. And getting that opportunity to play for the national team, because God looks what's in our heart. And I've always dreamt of playing for the national team, and then that happens. And people say, but it happened very late. It happened in God's time, not mine. Because if God wanted things to change, it would have changed before. During my playing days in 1995, when we lost to Nigeria, we lost going to the World Cup, and I said at the time I was going to retire, and some of the players said, no, you can't retire, and when it's your time, because God puts it in your heart, and it wasn't my time, and I continued playing, and when I got dropped from the national team, I was a bit angry, but when I looked at the bigger picture, it was time.
Yeah.
It was time. And as I said, I'd already done part of my coaching badge, and the club that I was at, actually myself and Shalene Boyson, a very good friend of mine, became the co-coaches. And but she was more still coaching than what I was, because I was practically at the last stages of my career. And after that, I just took over. It was a natural thing. It was a natural thing where you're already a coach on the field and you don't realize that you're a coach on the field when you're busy with players. And from then on, I put everything into that. But giving up the game,
yes.
It was tough because you always think you can add more. We had a very young team, and I was one of the more senior players. And the only reason I kept playing was to bring them up, to make sure that when I step out that they were ready. But then I started making excuses for not going to training. And it was more comfortable lying in bed. And when I started making excuses, I knew it was time to give up.
Yeah.
I didn't have the heart anymore to be able to play. And it was a difficult decision, but at the end I had to make that decision for my own sanity, for my own well-being, because I couldn't keep up with the young players anymore.
Yeah.
And that was one of the signs. The other sign was that I used to look forward to training every day, but now I was looking for an excuse not to go to training, which meant that I didn't love the game or to play at that time. And, I spoke to my mother, who was still alive at the time, and she said, you must do what you feel is right, you must do, because you are a role model in the community also, and young girls look up to you.
Yeah.
And then that's when I decided, that is it for me.
So what would 60-year-old Desiree Ellis say to 15-year-old Desiree Ellis?
I would say to that young Desiree Ellis that, do whatever you love doing and pursue it with everything that you have, because it's a God-given talent that you have, and each and every one of us has got a God-given talent, and it might be different. Some might be good at cooking, and that is a talent. and pursue that with all that you have, because that is going to create opportunities for you, but also for your family, and make the lives of those around you better because of what you are doing. Because, like I said before, we're not put on this earth just to be. We put on this earth to make a difference. And what a way to make a difference in your family life.
Yeah, I'm reminded right now of that very famous Eric Liddell quote, the great sprinter from the 1920s. Neither of us were alive. But Eric Liddell says, I believe that God made me for a purpose, but I also believe that he made me fast. And when I run, I feel God's pleasure. And I think a lot of sports people can connect with that. But it's discovering the purpose behind the talent.
There we go. You feel alive when you are busy doing something that you love, because you know that God has put it there. And God wants us to use that talent to the best that we have, because He's given us something that we can change other people's lives with. Because ultimately, we're in the game to change lives more than playing the game. Playing the game is part of it. The other part is changing the lives.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, we are blessed to be a blessing.
Of course.
We're not supposed to keep the blessing to ourselves. That's what God said to Abraham when he called him, and He's been saying it to His children ever since, hasn't He? And it comes over loud and clear that you're somebody who's always wanted to use your God-given talent as a blessing to others. Des, it's been great to have this conversation. You really have been and are a pioneer of the women's game. In fact, it transcends that. You are a pioneer in South African sport, and I'm really looking forward in the next episode of chatting to you about your coaching journey. Thank you, Des.
Thanks for having me.
The Call Up Podcast, where faith meets sport and life. This is brought to you by Sports Chaplaincy South Africa.
The power of his dream brings you here. LIA Productions.